All right. My name is Cosette. I am the Assistant Director for Evidence Synthesis Services at the University Libraries at Virginia Tech.
And I'm Corinne Guimont. I am the Director of Virginia Tech Publishing and Press in the University Libraries at Virginia Tech. And we pulled this session together because we wanted to chat a little bit about how we've begun collaborating to improve and advance, like the title says, at peer review for evidence synthesis publications. So as evidence synthesis and publishing programs are growing in academic libraries, how can library professionals in these areas collaborate to support each other and support each other and research happening on their campuses? So in this presentation, we'll discuss how we've begun working together to explore possible paths forward for improving peer review processes for evidence synthesis publications, both from Cosette's perspective as an ES library professional and my perspective as a publishing professional. So how did this come about? Really organically. We've both been here I've been here 8.5 years.
Been here a little over 6.
Yeah, so we've both been here for a while. We've been working together for a while. We've chatted on and off. And we've been able to get to know each other and learn a lot about each other's work. So I think over time, these conversations just became more and more specific about some of the work that we were doing, and we started to see that overlap, particularly when it came to peer review. It's also important to note that both of our areas are kind of currently growing. So as we were diving into more and more of this, we were looking at ways that we could grow with the resources that we already had in the library. I think this specific conversation actually happened over lunch one day. Where we were like, wait, why aren't we working together on this stuff? So we began making more specific concrete plans to collaborate and to better put processes into place for ways we could advance peer review. And with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Corinne. So to kind of highlight what the issue is, the reason that we're talking about this to begin with, there is a notable amount of poor quality evidence synthesis that gets published and put out into the ether. And this is not exclusive to a specific discipline. As those of us in the evidence synthesis field know, health sciences and medical sciences have really led the way with evidence synthesis methods. And we see that adoption of these methods going throughout disciplines, including engineering, social sciences, pretty much every discipline that I've encountered has some form of an evidence synthesis approach that they're employing. But it is not exclusive that these newer fields are adapting these methods are necessarily doing so poorly. That's not the issue that we're seeing. We are seeing across disciplines, including health disciplines, a variation in quality, which then in turn is and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but throws into the question the results, which then, of course, the usability of the results, and thus the usefulness of the effort that was put into making those studies happen in the first place. So there's also across disciplines, but there's also some other trends that may be worth looking into. They've been looked into a little bit, such as whether there's a trend in quality across different impact metrics, journals with different impact metrics. Some studies have found in clinical sciences that there are that the quality of evidence synthesis reviews are higher among those in journals with high impact metrics. Then some studies have actually found that that relationship does not necessarily exist. There's also some questions over whether we are seeing an increase in improvement in quality metrics over time, which of course I would expect, though that is still in question as well. And I've said quality a lot, so I do want to just talk about what we mean by evidence synthesis quality and our concern over these publications potentially lacking in quality a little bit. At the very base level, like the minimal kind of measure that one would use to determine quality is just the adherence to standard reporting guidelines. Taking that a step further, because reporting guidelines just tell us what we need to report. Methodological and conduct guidelines might give us an idea of the actual methodological rigor. And so those are the guidelines that exist to tell us what it is that we need to do. So while Prisma might be a great example of an example that folks are familiar with for reporting guidelines, the Cochrane Collaboration Handbook is a really good example for methodological guidelines in health and medicine. There's also standards put out there from the Campbell Collaboration for social science topics. And then we've also got some groups like the Collaboration for Environmental Evidence that gives us guidelines for conducting evidence synthesis reviews regarding environmental management. And so you can see that there is an opportunity for different disciplines to really build up their methodological and reporting guidelines. But at the very core of all of these across disciplines, there is this basic expectation of having a clear established scope, which is made up of your research question and your eligibility criteria, in contrast to traditional literature review. Evidence synthesis reviews like systematic reviews and meta-analyses are intended to answer a research question, and not just talk about what is going on in the field with regard to a topic. They also require comprehensive searches, dual independent screeners. Some of these methods require an assessment of the risk of bias of the studies that are included in those in the synthesis, a systematic approach for data extraction, and thorough, transparent reporting of what had been done, such that it could be reproduced or even audited by another group. And the reason for all of these things is that the evidence synthesis methods are characterized by trying to reduce the risk of bias throughout the process itself. And again, the idea is that if we are going to, spend all this time and effort to synthesize this evidence, we want it to be good when it gets published. At the next level, even further than just looking at the adherence to the methodological guidelines that exist or that they had selected, you might also evaluate using risk of bias tools. So I mentioned risk of bias in the context of the review itself, where we're looking at the risk of bias of the studies that we're synthesizing. And that's just another way of saying, are they internally valid? Do the methods lead logically to the results, or are there opportunities throughout the method that could have led to some kind of systematic bias, which makes the results less reliable? Same kind of idea for evidence synthesis methods. And then even further than that is this idea of certainty of evidence. And so that is probably best characterized by the grade method, which is applied to existing evidence synthesis reviews to determine the reliability of the resultant evidence. So it's taking into consideration the risk of bias of the studies that are included, but then also the risk of bias of the whole process itself. All of this is really important. I've mentioned a few times that you're going to put in a lot of effort and time. I haven't, I will say here that these reviews tend to take months to years worth of time. They require a team of researchers. And oftentimes we're grappling with a great deal of evidence that needs to be thoughtfully synthesized in a way that can achieve whatever goal was stated. And we know that across fields, across method types also, that retractions are happening and are an important part of the scientific life cycle. But they are costly and they require a lot of cleanup and effort, or effort and cost to clean up. And even still, once a journal has had to do a lot of retractions, there's the risk of reputational damage long term, even after they've been dealt with. I think that Elsevier is doing some really fantastic investments right now into trying to take their corpuses and retract, make sure that the integrity of the research that they've got out there through their different journals is in fact of high quality. That's an indicator that again the retraction issue is something that is going on across fields, and it would be nice if we don't have to retract a bunch of evidence syntheses in the next 20, 50 years. But in order to do that, we need to improve the quality of what's getting published now. This is another issue also for smaller publishers because although Elsevier has this opportunity to invest a lot of resources into this retroactive cleanup process, a lot of smaller publishers don't have those resources, which makes it more likely that poor quality research might actually continue to be out there unaddressed.
And further affect the reputation of those journals and publishers as well.
Exactly. Um, Tying into all of this is the actual intent behind evidence synthesis methods. So systematic reviews, meta-analyses, scoping reviews. These are all methods that are intended to inform policy, decision-making, future research direction, future funding for different opportunities for research direction or different initiatives outside of research. And so the intention of evidence synthesis is to be the translational point of all this amazing research that we have into practice. And so it kind of elevates that need to for it to be of high quality, rigor, and internally valid, and then of course externally valid to whatever group that they're trying to support. And this is a conversation that Corinne and I are not making up right now. This is something that's been studied. For example, I've cited a study here that looks at peer evaluations of systematic reviews, and we're seeing a lot more attention paid to this area. So it's a good opportunity. So there are resources, obviously, that are already available. I want to emphasize that libraries are a natural space for exploring these opportunities, and that these conversations, like our main pitch here, is that conversations between evidence synthesis providers and publishing presses and folks who are supporting publishing in general are a great place for synergy and opportunities to address some of these issues. We know that there's plenty of evidence that the involvement of librarians as co-authors in evidence synthesis methods will improve the overall quality of those. Specifically, the searches is our big contribution, but of those methods overall, because the search is the foundation of the rest of the project. There are, of course, as I've mentioned, reporting guidelines and conduct guidelines and risk of bias assessment tools that exist, whether they're being used in the peer review process or not. And then there's also, some issues, and like I mentioned, whether these tools are being used or not, it varies across journals and fields, of course. And so we want to make sure, to acknowledge that there are some studies out there that are identifying, for example, in veterinary sciences, systematic review standards are inconsistent and maybe are lacking a little bit according to the study. We also see that sometimes guideline developers, peer reviewers, and journal editors are not really taking into consideration these methods. Of course, that is an opportunity to maybe address, to foster the use of the resources that already exist. Some other promising strategies, I mentioned that the inclusion of library professionals in the methods themselves has been shown to correlate with improved methodological rigor, but also including librarians and information professionals as peer reviewers might be promising. We might, as I mentioned on the last slide, there is maybe some wide variation in evidence-based guidelines for your journal when it comes to establishing expectations for peer reviewers for evidence synthesis methods. We also could consider incorporating statistical peer review or open peer review practices, which have been shown to have a positive impact on the overall quality of what gets published. I've mentioned a lot that there are these tools that exist, but they aren't adapted across disciplines and fields, across all disciplines and fields, I should say. And so it would be useful to have more tailored, nuanced tools available for these different fields, different niches. Um, and then, of course, there's always room for more studies. So conducting some assessment of these peer review interventions, which if you follow the links, some of these are assessments and are showing some promise, or some areas that maybe weren't as promising. So being reflective is also always important. I'm gonna pass it over to Corinne now.
Awesome. So we've talked a lot about kind of what's going on, and now let's go ahead and shift to what are some potential proactive solutions that we see that we're starting to kind of explore here at Virginia Tech. So one big thing is, can we open the dialogue between journal editors and library professionals? This can help educate and encourage best practices. That gives people a place to go when they have questions. If they're unsure about things, they know, oh, hey, I can talk to those. It can help journal editors identify those poor systematic reviews when they get them, maybe early on, so that it doesn't go through that full process, but they're catching it early on. So maybe even before peer review, maybe an editorial review process or phase. And then there's also the opportunity to consult on potential peer review models outside of the double anonymous peer review norm that we often see. So, because that just mentioned the possibility for open peer reviews. So, folks in the library, especially in the library, tend to lean more on open peer review models. So, how can we kind of open that dialogue as journal editors begin to explore some of those? Well, maybe we can encourage journal editors to explore some of those um, non-traditional forms of peer review, open peer review, or even single anonymous peer review, and then how can we help them organize that process and understand that process. I think the biggest idea is making sure that folks realize that the library is poised to take this role on, that we have experts in these areas that can help and add to this. And then opening the dialogue, I think early on when we started talking about this, we were talking about the journal editors for Virginia Tech Publishing and Press, which we have about 14 journals. But as the conversations have gone on, how can we open that dialogue between journal editors all over our campus, all over our university, who are maybe editors at other journals elsewhere, and then even possibly beyond that? So creating more of a community of journal editors who can be better educated and prepared to take on these issues when they find them. And then, oh, you're good. Um, but as we can be as proactive as humanly possible, but we'll still need a process in place for when things do come up, for when a review slips in. And this is happening in so many areas of publishing right now, even beyond evidence synthesis. I mean, the biggest one that everybody's probably thinking of is AI, and how do you handle an AI generated article? But that's a whole other presentation topic. But when we have retractions, and these retractions that came up, how can we as a smaller publisher be prepared to handle those issues? And one possibility is creating a policy for the press or for the journals that directly states, okay, this is how you handle this. This is what we know. How do we do this review? Another possibility is to include some of our evidence synthesis experts in the library in that policy. So if I get an email or a notification that one of our journal articles um, is poor quality, that we shouldn't be publishing it, that we should consider retracting it, we'll go ahead and conduct a review of that. But now I know, okay, let's go reach out to Gazette and her team and have them help review that process and see, is this a legitimate complaint, or is this somebody who's upset about something else? Because that does happen. So how do we include more experts within the library in reviewing these articles that might need to be retracted? Well, thank you. So what we're doing at VT, I kind of hinted at some of this, but yes, building more of a community among journal editors, not just within our journals, but within the university as a whole. We're a fairly large university. There's lots of folks being taking on roles with journals outside of ours on this campus. So how can we build that community, give them a space to share their experiences, give a space to share best practices, also give them a space to talk to each other. Like, how would you handle this in this situation? Or how does your journal handle this, especially when they're coming from different presses or publishers or um, societies that they're working with? So how are the different groups handling these situations as they come up? Currently, Virginia Tech Publishing and Press is creating an ethics review committee for journals. And we are looking to include at least one evidence synthesis expert on that committee. This committee is coming together again for a variety of reasons, not just for these systematic reviews, but also for other things that might come up. But as we create these committees and as we create a structure that may be meant to deal with one issue, how can we kind of broaden that and have a cohesive group of folks, professionals within the field, journal editors are on that committee, but then how can we also include some library professionals and information professionals to help review these materials as we ask these questions? Um, Hopefully we don't have to ask them too much, but when we have to.
Mhm.
um, and then the other big thing on our mind is how do we continue to foster this collaboration between our units beyond just the two of us? Like I mentioned, we had lunch together. This has all come up very organically, but how do we kind of get other folks on our teams to work together more without it feeling forced? Because when it's forced, it doesn't necessarily go as well. So yes, working on committees together, but then also looking at ways that we can encourage more conversations around these topics across our units, and then eventually probably at large as we talk about other organizations that we're involved in. How can we get different groups to talk to each other more and share some of these experiences? Bigger picture, we also want to do some further research. So there's things that we're trying to incorporate, but as we do that, how can we also learn more about these potential issues and learn about other possible solutions? So I think one option is to further study some of the standards for other journals, get a better feel for what other publishers, what other journals, societies, and whatnot are handling these things. We know how Elsevier is handling it. How are other smaller publishers doing that? Um, One possibility would be to interview editors of other discipline-specific journals and organizations. Again, large campus, we can reach out to just folks here first and then maybe kind of expand there. So starting to create kind of a set of interview questions, ask questions, and learn about what other folks are doing. Another possibility is to just gather more information on what has been done, because I've done a ton of research already on that, but how can we gather more information on what's been done before and really just try to make it. I really like the way I think you wrote this, the best, how to make the best choice the easiest choice for journal editors and for publishers. And then to continue identifying gaps and explore the various ways the library units could support these gaps. So we're identifying the gaps in these areas, but what other gaps exist? Are there other areas in our library that might be able to help and support this? Um, we're just two groups, but we have a whole library full of people who are invested in the research process and the research practices. So how can we pull those folks in over time and continue to build out some of this work? And I think with that, unless you had anything else to add.
No, this is perfect.
Awesome. I think we wanted to leave a lot of opportunities for questions. So we're a little bit short on time, but we wanted to really leave lots of time for questions, possibly hear more about what you all are doing at your libraries or how you all are working with other units in your library, or even across campus, to to kind of build that up. So if you are watching this after the fact, feel free to reach out to us and let us know. Here are our emails. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and turn it over for questions.